Shirking Fortification might be better than Elemental Aversion in some cases. You might think the core gameplay is crazy. Elemental Aversion is best in slot now after the Shirking Fortification nerf, and yes, in some cases that might be true, but let me show you some of the testing we did on the PTR and explain at the end why Shirking Fortification might be better than Elemental Aversion. For this test, I wanted to test Elemental Aversion versus Shirking Fortification. The first test here is heavy, where we test the first hit of a normal attack, no Shirking Fortification, or Elemental Aversion, and then we test the next attack with Shirking Fortification and then Elemental Aversion. If we compare Shirking Fortification versus the normal attack, we get about a 7.5% mitigation. If we test Elemental Aversion versus the normal attack, then we get about a 19% damage mitigation. And you might say, how does 7% against 19% compare? Well, I'll explain it in the end of the video, where I go a bit deeper into Shirking Fortification versus Elemental Aversion. Next up, let's quickly test medium, just so that we can get our bases. For example, medium, we tested the basic attack and versus the Shirking Fortification attack, and we get about a 6.4 mitigation percentage. And if we test Elemental Aversion, it's consistent, it still stays at 19% mitigation versus a normal attack and having Elemental Aversion, so the difference was 19% right there. If we move to light, this one is interesting. If we move to light and we test Shirking Fortification versus just the normal attack, we get 4.3% mitigation, so that's about 2.1% less than medium gets. So super interesting. Light definitely shouldn't run Shirking Fortification at all, but the Elemental Aversion, you still get your 19% mitigation. So overall, Elemental Aversion will give you 19%, and for heavy you'll get 7.5% for Shirking Fortification, 6.4% for medium, and then only 4.3% for light. Now let's take a look at why I say Shirking Fortification might be better in some cases. But before we do that, a big thank you to Fusion Thunder for helping me with the test. Make sure to go check out his channel and go give him a subscribe. He makes great content on test as well, so definitely give his channel a look and go subscribe if you like his content. After seeing the test, you might ask me, why am I saying Shirking Fortification might still be good for heavy players? I'm only saying it might be good for heavy players because if you look at the mitigation for Shirking Fortification, you'll see the mitigation is still 7.5%. If we take our 8 gem slots and slot 4 pristine opal and 4 pristine onyx gems, we can push that mitigation all the way to 17.5%. This mitigation will count towards elemental and physical damage types. This includes bows, great axes, ice gauntlets, everything. If a great axe, for example, decides to split its damage to 50% elemental damage, we'll still be protected against it. Now, you might say true, we get that 17.5% mitigation if Shirking Fort is active, but we can have 19% Elemental Aversion mitigation and slot in 8 pristine onyx gems for a total of 20% physical damage mitigation, and these mitigations have no conditions. And you'll be right, but what happens if a player runs split damage with attunement on their melee weapons and buff the elemental damage with their ring and rune glasses? Will having that extra 2.5% you get be worth it when fighting in clumps? I personally think you'll get destroyed by melee players at the very least, since Elemental Aversion doesn't count towards it, and if they split the damage you're gonna get destroyed. There are also some abilities that avoid Elemental Aversion completely, for example Ice Storm, Ice Spike, and a couple of more. We did a whole video on it. I'll link it in the description below so that you can go check it out. I still think Shirking Fort has a place, and if you have a heavy burst set, then you should give it a shot if you like playing in clumps. If you're light or medium, then I do think Elemental Aversion is super good for you, but just make sure you jam correctly and don't just think you're immune now just because you got some Elemental Aversion on your gear. You might just get surprised by a beautiful ice spike. Medium might still be viable to run Shirking Fort, but you'll lose out on 1.1% mitigation compared to heavy, but for light, I definitely think Elemental Aversion is your best choice. I'm not saying Elemental Aversion is worthless, since Firestaff will probably be quite popular and Blunderbuss, but Elemental Aversion will get you killed if you do not consider the melee players that can basically switch their damage to Elemental if you are fighting in clumps. So jam appropriately, maybe just put in 3 opals in your jewelry and some onyxes on your gear so that you don't get completely destroyed if a melee user decides to split their damage. If you like this video, then don't forget to go follow me on Twitch, or you can watch this video right here where we tested Elemental Aversion and how some abilities just negate it.